The Timeline is a Blue Wire podcast. Welcome to the Timeline, of Phoenix Suns podcast. My name is Mike. I'm here with Sam. Sam, how's it going?
Hello, I'm doing very well this week. Ready to dive in with, I guess, a more clear head than we had, one could say, on our last podcast episode. Immediately after, it was like day one after disaster, after Doomsday. And, I thought we managed the conversation as best as we could. But today, we get to dive into the conversation in more detail with more level-headedness, and I'm excited.
Yeah, it is funny. Like a surprising amount of people listened to that episode, I thought. Yeah. And yeah, we did the best we could. I mean, ultimately, you and I are fans, so we're trying to mitigate our fandom to be level-headed. And I think, yeah, maybe you took a little bit of heat. I
didn't take any heat. People were mostly laughing. I mean, I may or may not have said let's just blow it all up at one point there, but I think it was at like the 52-minute mark or something of the podcast, so most people had tuned out already, and it's all good. It's a week later. We're less emotional. Everyone has to work through the process at their own speed, so here we are.
Well, I think this is where the conversation's going to get really interesting, because we're going to get into the real nitty-gritty of what this offseason can look like. And we can't think of a better way to do that than to be joined by our friend David Nash of the 4 Point Play newsletter. Am I still allowed to say that, David? How's it going?
It still exists online, so as long as that is still up, you can definitely still reference it. I'm going well, guys. I woke up this morning to a new Prime Minister here in Australia. As you just alluded to, the newsletter's ended. The Suns are out of the playoffs, so I don't know, maybe it's an omen for what we're going to talk about today, but lots of change going on in my world, and maybe that is something that will happen for the next few weeks and months for the Phoenix Suns. So I'm excited. As much as I've left the newsletter in the past, I'm not going to be able to go cold turkey on the Suns. So I appreciate you guys giving me a chance to kind of phase out of this stuff and still talk about some stuff that I really am always interested in.
I do want to give you the chance to expand on the newsletter stuff a little bit, just in case there's anyone listening to this who is not in the know about you ending the newsletter. So, and also kind of just, I guess, to toast the project, because it was a great project for what it was, that started in the bubble, I believe.
It did.
Yeah, and for hopefully, we've plugged it a million times. Hopefully most listeners of this podcast have sought out the work at some point. In case there's anyone who didn't, in my opinion, over the past 2 years, it was the best Suns coverage you could absolutely find, with the most detailed and just fulfilling, I guess, a niche that you absolutely could not find anywhere else, particularly with a couple of things. X's and O's was brilliant stuff. We could always count on each of your newsletters, just finding something that no one else was able to observe. And the other side of it being during the off seasons, the CBA coverage, the type of stuff that we're going to talk about today was stellar. So with all that being said, I was a little bit sad to hear that you are leaving the project behind. I understand why you're doing it. But maybe, just a toast to all of the work that you put in on it over the past couple of years, because it was great. And I'm very thrilled that you're not entirely leaving the Sun sphere behind and are still willing to join us on these podcasts, because otherwise that would be very sad for all of us.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Sam. I'm not going to lie. It's definitely been a sad week for me, and there was definitely some options where I kind of sat with a draft of one of my regular off-season kind of primers, a lot of the stuff that we're going to go through today. But typically, as soon as it went to the off-season, I turned over volumes and went to we got through 3 volumes and 3 seasons with the newsletter, being the bubble, the finals run, and then this season. So when I kind of looked at that and knew that this was something that I wanted to do eventually, it just made sense to end it, as sad as it was, straight after the finals. So again, really appreciate being able to jump on and still talk about some of the stuff that's floating around in my head. But yeah, it's been a bit of a kind of A sad week, particularly with a lot of the comments, both publicly and messages and emails that I got about it. I don't think I even realized, I guess the place that it had within the community from what a lot of people said. But at the end of the day, it was, I said it in my kind of goodbye there, it was taxing. You guys feel it in terms of what you do with the podcast and all the additional stuff. But, whether it was a podcast that I do with Max or a newsletter, I said I can't half-ass things. So it was literally hours and hours that would go into each issue that I did of the newsletter. And, that takes away from hours and hours that I could be doing other things. And particularly when you're doing it, virtually for free and on your own with no one else to kind of chip in when you are busy and doing other things, it was just time to kind of leave it in the past. But I won't be going cold turkey, as I said. So there's definitely lots of interesting things to talk about with this team. And I'm going to be relying on people like yourselves inviting me on every now and then to get some things off my chest rather than doing it through my own space.
Yeah, I'm not sure we could have let you quit cold turkey. We need your help. So I appreciate you joining us still, even just so immediately afterwards, after you announced that. But, of course, ending the newsletter would have been much more fun had they won a championship.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
But the season ended the way that it did. And honestly, everyone's been firing off their takes or their opinions or their thoughts on whatever that means. But, as much as we all talk, the three of us, we do talk a lot. I'm not sure we've really talked about just sort of general feelings about how it ended. What are your thoughts on the way it ended and the way it sort of, I don't know. It kind of couldn't have gone more badly as far as the last few games of that. What do you think?
Yeah, it was so un-Suns, the way that it ended in that last game, that I think that's the thing that people are struggling to grapple with the most, at least myself. I can only talk for myself, but it's obviously going to be pretty hard to look back with fondness on the regular season, but it was still a record-breaking season for the franchise, and I don't think that should be lost, even though it's going to be really hard to kind of celebrate it, given the way that they went out in the playoffs. But, I think, I just think that everything went wrong at the wrong time for the Suns. I've been looking back, particularly on the playoffs, and just wondering, in many respects, I think that Booker injury just kind of set off a bit of a snowball effect. Chris Paul had to do more in that first series than you would have anticipated or expected, and whether that had a say in how his body deteriorated for the second round and how he couldn't step up. The other thing, which Ayton really stepped up in the first round as that second option when Booker was out, and if you believe all the noise around that with what happened at the end of the Dallas series, I do wonder whether even that in itself created some tension among the team of how it kind of ended, because they needed someone else to step up like he did in round one. And it sounds like he wanted to, but the team had other ideas in how that should look, particularly if Chris Paul was still going to play. So, I just look back on that Booker injury. They just never got going in the playoffs. They never really looked like themselves outside of one or two games in both of those first two series. And, it's hard because, winning the amount of games that they did in the regular season and how good they looked, it's never going to sit well when you don't put your best foot forward when it counts the most.
I think thinking about that, you touched on the concept of them not maybe getting along as well at the end there. Whether it be Deandre Ayton or whatever you want to point at. The rumors were essentially that Deandre Ayton refused to go in after playing the amount of time that he played in Game 7, which ended up being 17 minutes. And since then, since the game ended, we have also had other rumors, other whispers about the team, potential breakdown between Monty Williams and Deandre Ayton. This is something that was reported on 98.7 Arizona Sports sometime between the Pelicans series and the Dallas series. There's the concept of some sort of breakdown between Chris Paul and Monty Williams has even been floated there on 98.7. And I think that is relatively interesting. People online have pointed at a moment where Jay Crowder waved off Chris Paul, who was trying to talk to him at some point during the Dallas series. Lots of things have been pointed at, I guess. And in some respects, hearing that things were a little more chaotic behind the scenes made me feel like, oh, okay, well, that explains it. Because like things going so badly, I almost just felt like that was inevitable, that things were a little worse behind the scenes than we thought. But for you, does that affect how you feel about roster construction this offseason and going forward into next season? Or do you think that the best route is to sort of just ignore the fact that there were things going on behind the scenes and this team was good enough to kind of keep it together the way it is?
Yeah, I mean, this question's always hard because we don't have the full picture. As you said, people are trying to point to certain things or look at rumors or read into half things that are being reported. So, our jobs and your and Sam's jobs is really hard to try and piece all of that together and come up with logical conclusions. I think one of the things that I took from a lot of the feedback when the newsletter ended and people were sending me notes and things were, that people really appreciated my kind of straightforward way of looking at things and being honest and not letting emotion take into it. So I guess to answer your question, I dig in. I kind of, without knowing the full context of things, I kind of look at what I do know. And I think that there's some pretty clear and key choices that they need to make over the offseason. And I kind of dig in and go, no, like, you don't make panic decisions. That's the quickest, most surefire way to ensure that, the peak that you have is very short-lived and then you're back down where we were for the last decade before this. I think there's some pretty clear, smart moves that they can make to ensure that they continue their peak and have the flexibility to do some things going forward and not kind of, throw the baby out with the bathwater and kind of go, oh, it's all a mess. Let's just make a whole bunch of changes now to potentially be finals bound again next season. So yeah, I guess I hope that answers your question. I'm looking at it quite black and white at the moment and not listening too much to the reports and rumors and reasons for why the team combusted the way that it did, to be perfectly honest, even though I do agree with you that it at least gives a little bit of background and insight into what we thought was, a pretty, not like the Suns finish, to be perfectly honest. So there is a little bit of, I guess, solace in that, even though it really hurts right now that they didn't even get past the second round.
Yeah, I do think it's possible that people are just, not that I entirely don't believe any of these reports that have come out over the past several days, but just based on what you're saying, David, which is what all of us felt about it just not looking like the team we had watched all season, I think it is also natural human nature to kind of grasp at any reasons you can to reconcile
100%
what the finished product was. And again, like you said, we don't know all of the details there. But this is why we brought you on. This is why I said at the very beginning that this is going to be a level-headed episode. Level-headed episode. Excuse me, because of what you said right there. You're going to bring the more black and white analysis and not force us into any panic moves, which is what I think we need. I know it's a little bit of a cliche analysis. To kind of go about it labeling like this guy is supposed to be a number one and this guy is supposed to be a number two and but like it's kind of like a schematic system that we sort of fall into and maybe it is a little bit cliche, but out of all of the guys who are supposed to be main key pieces on this team, on this core and going forward as well, between like kind of Chris Paul and Deandre Ayton, Mikal Bridges, I think you could throw Cam Johnson in there as well, Devin Booker of course.
Yep.
Is there anyone who you would say your faith or your confidence in their ability to continue to live up to what they're supposed to be Is there any one of those guys who you would single out and say your opinion changed the most based on this playoff run? Or is it all kind of just spaced out between everyone?
I think it's kind of all spaced out. And again, maybe that's going to be the trend of this episode of just boring, non-hot take answers. But, my opinion hasn't changed in Devin Booker. I can tell you that much. And my opinion hasn't changed in Chris Paul because I kind of already... This is the other thing about the discourse online that I really dislike is, a lot of what we saw just tends to, I think, ram home pre-existing thoughts that people had of certain people, and they'll use that to kind of really make their point. I think Chris Paul is a victim in many ways of how great he has been during the regular season for the Suns for the last 2 years and for the last 3 years for him. Like going back to back All NBA, most likely in ages, 35, 36, 37 is, pretty unheard of and pretty unique. And I think
it's supposed to be the cherry on top of a legacy.
Yeah.
Not
and
like
I think
anything that defines it. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think in many respects after the trade that they made, if he was just regular old Chris Paul and made everyone better and didn't take over games like we saw occasionally in both the regular seasons and the playoffs over the last few years, then the expectations wouldn't be that high. And when he has a choke series like he did against the Dallas, whether injured or not, then I don't think we would get the pushback that we got from a lot of people. So, my opinion of him hasn't changed. I think next season and how we talk about the rest of these off-season moves and what the Suns do going forward, I think it does start to change. And you can look at the last 2 seasons and how they've ended with Chris Paul and go, look, it's time to start turning this team over to some of the other guys. But I dislike the way that opinion has changed for what they should have done the last 2 seasons, because the guy was all NBA. We had an all NBA backcourt. The reason they made it as far as they did is because they built the team around those 2 guys. And this kind of whataboutism of being able to go that far and potentially even further if they turn the team over to Mikal Bridges, Deandre Ayton instead, honestly, I think it's lunacy. So I think that it's a conversation that is ready to be had going forward. I think the way people try and have it retrospectively now is kind of a bit mental, to be honest.
Yeah, I guess what's sort of happened to me since the end of the season is as you start to think through, and we're going to get into this, as you start to think through some of the options for this team in the offseason, you kind of come to the conclusion that if they don't find a way to sign the guys that they have, their cap space situation is kind of a mess because they're so close. I mean, they're above. They essentially have no options other than signing their own guys because they won't have any cap space without that.
Correct.
And then, so the concept comes down to how comfortable are you? And this is me talking to myself at this point, of course. How comfortable are you with the concept of bringing all of these guys back when they just ended their playoff run with a series marred by a player potentially quitting on the team, some sort of dysfunction between the coach and the players, and a complete loss of their offensive and defensive identity for 4 of the 7 games that they played.
Yeah.
And, and the reason, by the way, that you sort of come back to the concept of them just re-signing these guys and going into next season, like I said, is a cap space reason. But then you have the idea of, well, you re-sign these guys, they're under contract now, they're more valuable as trade pieces as well, whether that be Cameron Johnson or Deandre Ayton. If they want to move those guys, they have the opportunity for Cameron Johnson to assign him to an extension. Trading him gets a little complicated after that. With Deandre Ayton, if he signs a new contract, his contract just basically starts next year, and they'd be able to trade him by the deadline if they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so my mind will then shift over to, well, how would Chris Paul feel about that? How would Devin Booker feel about that? These guys just made the finals a year ago, and now will they feel comfortable going into next season with a team that in many ways failed them, and I think not the other way around. I think you know, to your point, Devin Booker and Chris Paul, to me, you know what Chris Paul is. You know that if you go into the postseason with him, that there's the chance that he could be not fully healthy at all points of that postseason. That means the team has to be built with some sort of pressure release valve for him to not have the entirety of the team on his back for significant portions of the postseason.
Yeah.
And then Devin Booker is I think who a lot of people think he is, and I think the discourse on him, I think we'll probably get more into in future episodes because I think it's interesting. But like, I'm struggling to feel comfortable with the option that makes the most sense on paper.
Yeah.
And David, as the guy who, it seems like your focus right now is sort of on paper,
Yes.
which is the right way to go because we don't know everything, right? We're just guys. I mean, really, talking about the team.
Just guys being dudes.
Just guys talking to themselves, as you so eloquently put at the very top there. That's what we're doing at the end of the day.
Are you there with me as well? Or do you feel comfortable with that idea? Are you as scared as me?
Two things come to mind from what you just said. The first thing is that I don't think the on-paper way is the way that you should ever be looking at things in totality. And I think when I present a lot of this stuff, it's to bring, I guess, my perspective of what maybe a lot of people aren't thinking about. But I think at the end of the day, if you're like the GM of this team, you have to factor in the on paper, the emotional part of it, the team building part of it. And that's why I really appreciate, you know, whether it's jumping on with you guys or having discourse with people after I drop a newsletter with things that people either agree or disagree with, because I think you have to take all of that in. The other thing that I would say is I don't think this team has done anything over the last 2 years that Devin Booker and Chris Paul haven't signed off on. And that's how I grapple with what you're currently grappling with in terms of whatever this team does in the offseason and going forward. I personally believe, even though the two of them try as hard as they can in interviews and publicly to say that they're in the dark and it's not the case, I believe that James Jones, being good at his job, takes it to his two best players, makes them understand what the vision is, what their options are if they go down this road, and lets them sign off on it. So that's
I'm sorry
how
to interrupt, David, but
yeah, go for
you're
it.
giving me the mental image of James Jones going to Devin Booker and Chris Paul at the end of this season and saying, "We need to sign Ife Lundberg to a 2-way contract. We need to get this guy," and they sign off on it. So maybe not everything,
okay.
but the important moves for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe the ones that don't really impact them or the team, he doesn't necessarily get sign off from them and make sure they go and watch his YouTube highlights before they sign the contract. But I think the big deals, and we've talked about this privately, I'm willing to say it, you know, publicly, is I think the Chris Paul trade is one that we have always looked at, and a certain comment from Deandre Ayton about, you know, being surprised and going to Booker to talk about it, and Booker being as surprised as him. I think Booker probably did.
Zero chance.
Yeah,
Zero chance
yeah.
Booker was surprised.
I think he deserves an Oscar for convincing Deandre Ayton that it was news to him as well, because I just don't believe that that's the case, and I don't believe it'll be the case. Let's say Deandre Ayton gets traded this offseason and Devin Booker and Chris Paul say, "Oh,
I'm shocked.
Can't believe it happened. I trust in our team, but, you know, I'm really sorry to lose our guy, blah, 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 blah," all the usual pleasantries. It's all bullshit as far as I'm concerned. I'm not saying I'm definitely correct on that, but you don't run a team as a GM in this modern NBA and do as good a job as James Jones has on most moves without running it by your best players. And as much as some people listening to this may not agree or not believe it, the two franchise guys on the Phoenix Suns right now are Devin Booker and Chris Paul, and I'm sure they're across everything that has happened and is going to happen for the future of the Suns.
And I think it's kind of funny because it's like we're talking about this as if this is like a long run by a core that you're just sort of coming to grips with the fact that they're never going to make it over that next hump. Now, once again, the Utah Jazz comparison comes up here. But the difference between the Suns, the reason it feels sort of in fast forward, is because one, Chris Paul's 37, and two, they made the NBA Finals last year.
Yeah.
So for somebody like Devin Booker or somebody like Chris Paul, the expectation is to have an opportunity to win a championship before Chris Paul has to end his career, which at some point can happen sooner than later. So, it's just, it is a little bit in fast forward compared to the Utah Jazz because of those reasons. I do have to wonder, though, why in the world did Deandre Ayton's agent allow him to do an interview up 3-2 against the Dallas Mavericks where he talks about how sometimes he only gets 2 hours of sleep.
2 hours of sleep a night.
Because he's playing so much video games.
Yeah.
And in that interview, he talks about how confident he is that they're going to beat the Dallas Mavericks. That was just a completely insane thing.
Yeah.
That I did not see coming. And I didn't read it during the series. I just read it.
I did. Did you, David?
No, I still haven't read it. I saw the quotes.
That's a massive rookie mistake, or even pre-rookie mistake, like a guy who you'd think doesn't have NBA media training. Mistake being made in year 4. I was taken aback. And to be honest with you guys, when I initially read it, I didn't post it anywhere because I was like, nothing good can come from this. But what I thought, honestly, what I thought to myself was like, he's lucky that they're going to get by the Mavericks, which is my own fault for thinking that. Yeah. But I was like, he's lucky that they're going to get by the Mavericks, so nothing will come of this.
Because the photos of him playing video games in that article, honestly, look like a Mountain Dew commercial from like 1998. They are so dramatic. He is holding the controller. His legs are up in the air. He's turned sideways like he's playing a video game like NBA Jam in a commercial. Like it's so bizarre and so weird. It's such a weird decision by his agent because clearly that article was meant to set up the idea of him getting a max contract in the offseason, and every part of it they botched. And I think they're lucky that it didn't catch on more than it did.
They are lucky that Patrick Beverley was willing to slander Chris Paul as hard as he did.
Yes.
Honestly, they are, because it took so much of the pressure off of DeAndre Ayton. It really did. I mean, if the entire scope of the conversation or the concept of the conversation here is DeAndre Ayton learning to be the guy and being a max contract guy, meaning that he is going to be, wherever he plays for, whether it's the Phoenix Suns or any other team, he's going to be one of the top 2 guys, top 2 offensive focal points on any team. He's going to have to learn to take the heat that comes with playing that role. And again, not that I want to gang up on the guy, because I said plenty last week that like it wasn't DeAndre Ayton's fault that they lost by 50. It was everyone's fault. But if we're being honest, DeAndre Ayton got off a little bit easy in that discussion. And if he wants to be a max guy, he has to get used to that max pressure as well.
Yeah, and his agent has to be better at setting him up for success when it comes to those kinds of interviews, because the idea of doing an interview specifically about his gaming and how he spent so much of his time doing that right before his free agency is just completely insane.
Listen, life's all about leveling up. Whether you're handling business on the field or kicking it in your zone, you like to celebrate with cigars that match the moment. That's why you should link up with Famous Cigars to bring you a wild deal. Right now, you can grab 8 premium cigars for just $8. You heard that right. 8 top-rated cigars at $1 a stick. Top quality brands like Oliva, Romeo y Julieta, and Davidoff. Hand-picked just for you and worth over $80. Hit up famouscigars.com/cam and lock in this exclusive deal. While you're there, check out their insane selection of premium cigars, all shipped fresh and fast from their massive 20,000 square foot humidor. That's half a football field. Famous Cigars has been in the game since 1939 and still family owned. So celebrate every win with the folks at Famous. 8 cigars for $8. famouscigars.com/cam.
But this does give us an opportunity to talk about the things that we need to talk about when it comes to DeAndre Ayton, because the number one question of the offseason is, what do the Suns do with DeAndre Ayton? And I think for us, obviously, a lot of the coverage is going to be centered around that. But for like other places that talk about the Suns once when talking about the 29 other teams as well, that's the only thing they're going to talk about. You know, what do the Suns do with Deandre Ayton? Here's 4 minutes on that. Now let's move on to another team. And so that is just how coverage works. You don't have time to talk about everything, so you cover the biggest issues. I think there are a few ways to talk about this, David. And of course, everyone who knows you knows why you're on the episode that we're talking about this. I think we have to start with the sign and trade conversation.
Okay.
Because I think that is probably the thing that people least understand.
Is where the misinformation starts, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's because the obvious option, if they're not wanting to sign him, would be a sign and trade. Go ahead, Sam.
Can I just maybe interject, though, that actually the place that we should start, just because I think this will be really quick, there is an option that says the Suns give DeAndre Ayton the money that he's wanted all along of their own kind of volition, which is the 5-year max deal that they could have signed him to as an extension last year with 8% raises every year that he is only entitled to if he signs with the Suns, right? That is an option. And I just want to say quickly, so there is that option that exists, and throw it to you guys and say, scale of 1 to 10, what's our confidence level in them actually offering that to him? For me, it's basically a 0, but I want to check in with you guys as well.
1 at the highest for me.
Yeah.
-10.
Okay. All right. I just want to make sure, which doesn't mean necessarily, and we'll go through all of the options, but doesn't necessarily mean that DeAndre Ayton doesn't start next season on a max deal with the Suns, but the type of max deal that he would sign that implies would be one that the Suns match from another team, which would be just intrinsically less money than they could give, than they could offer him if they just did the 5-year extension with 8% raises, like I said. So we've ruled that out, but I just want to make sure we ruled that out first.
Before anyone jumps down my throat, I will say I advocated for signing the full 5-year max last offseason for DeAndre
all three of
Ayton
us did.
For a number of reasons. And I'm happy to jump into the sign and trade first, as long as we get to kind of restricted free agency after that, because the reason I say -10 is, restricted free agency in the NBA is still really, really tough on players. And there's just no reason for the Suns to come up now with a 5-year fully max deal, particularly with the context of the season that DeAndre Ayton had. So that's the reason for my answer, not because I think it would be a disaster or, that he's undeserving, because I would have given it to him last year. But as Sam very rightly pointed out, fast forward a whole season, there's actually more options for the Suns and Ayton this offseason than they had last year. You're kind of tied to the full 5-year max last offseason, whereas now they can kind of do some slightly different things, which I'm excited to get into.
And for those who maybe have forgotten, I think all three of us had made the same point about signing him to that max deal last year, and part of that was rewarding him for the things he improved on.
Yep.
And also eliminating distractions for this season and creating an environment where he was not necessarily, let's just say it, playing for himself. He was playing for the team. And you could all point at the comments that he had where he said, I can't pass the ball to myself. Him scoring more points maybe would have benefited the team, but it would have definitely benefited himself. And if the team needed him to do something else that they believed would have made the team better and could have helped them to win the series, it may have been easier if he was already signed onto a contract instead of him in the back of his mind, at the very least, considering his free agency going forward and how his numbers in the playoffs impacted his free agency. And I think we saw how a distraction like that could impact the postseason at the very least. And now the Suns are in the position where they have to figure out what to do with him. The reason I wanted to start with the sign and trade is because I've seen about 1,000 ideas for a sign and trade. And I think the three of us have sort of settled on it's really difficult. I think that if I had to guess on a scale of how likely we all think that it is going to be a sign and trade, that's going to happen, I would guess that I am the closest to thinking that it's going to happen. Sam, you think It seems like you think that it's just not going to happen. The sign and trade is just too hard, right?
Yeah, too hard. Yeah, it's not impossible. It's just you look at the kind of historical precedent for what you get back on sign and trades, and it doesn't feel like there's any sort of return, to me at least, out there that just what we were talking about 15 minutes ago, that like if James Jones presented a potential return to Chris Paul and Devin Booker and said, hey guys, guess what? We can get the 11th pick and a role player in a sign and trade for DeAndre Ayton. What do you guys think? Like it doesn't feel to me, based on the types of returns that I'm envisioning. And
they would have to hate him, basically.
Yeah. And not the sort of crazy,
Yeah.
we can, like, don't worry, we can flip him for Durant. We can flip him for
Or
Embiid.
Towns
like,
or something. Yeah.
Yeah. There's none of that's not going on in my mind at all. So yes, I think that it is pretty unlikely that they'll do a sign and trade.
I think it's
Very
definitely
unlikely.
possible just because they tried to trade him in the regular season this last year. David, where do you stand? And then let's get into what sort of makes up a sign and trade.
Yeah, I mean, if you guys are either end of the spectrum, so to speak, I'm probably somewhere in the middle. And that's because, I think you both make really good points that it may be one of the options available to shake things up, but it also historically, as Sam said, doesn't return a great deal or fair value for the player that you're giving up in a sign and trade. And one of those reasons is because of the rules regarding sign and trades, which is what I guess am here for, to hopefully help educate the listeners for why there shouldn't be thousands of sign and trade ideas on the internet right now.
David, where do you want to start with explaining those rules? Because there are several of them.
There are several, but there's kind of three key ones. So the first one I would say is that the deal has to be between 3 and 4 years. So the Suns are signing DeAndre Ayton, but it's it's really theoretically the other team that he's going to that is signing. So they can only sign him to a 3-year or 4-year deal as part of the sign and trade. The team receiving DeAndre Ayton in a sign and trade is automatically hard capped at the apron, which is 155 million. What that means is under no circumstances after the trade or going forward with future moves can the other team go over that amount. I shared an image with you guys before we jumped on, and it might be a good idea to share with the listeners as they go through all of these things that we're going to discuss, just to kind of illustrate things. But that's key because it limits the amount of teams that you can sign and trade DeAndre Ayton to, because many of those teams aren't going to be willing to hard cap themselves at the 155 million by accepting DeAndre Ayton. And the third and most important one is one of the trickiest terms when it comes to the CBA, which is base year compensation. What I would say first is anyone listening to this and that has followed my work will remember during the season, trade deadline, and last offseason, for different reasons, but we discussed trading Landry Shamet and how difficult it can be in certain circumstances. He was quite easy because his salary was still quite low on that new contract. But base year compensation kind of at its core means that if DeAndre Ayton signs for his max, which is 30.5 million for next year, for Phoenix, that means that his outgoing salary is actually half that amount. So 15 and change, basically. So when it comes to what we can take back in normal trading rules, once you're a tax team, which Phoenix are very likely to be, you can only bring back the outgoing salary plus 25%. So to fast forward, the math on that is 19.16 million. So all of that is to say, when it comes to Phoenix, and this really helps the value equation that we were talking about before in not getting fair value, you don't actually send DeAndre Ayton out by himself and get Kevin Durant back. A, because that's just unlikely to happen in the first place, but B, and more importantly, because it's actually illegal. It cannot happen. The Suns, if they only send DeAndre Ayton out by himself in a sign and trade, can only get roughly $19 million worth of players coming back to Phoenix. And that's one reason why, as Sam suggested, you never get fair value in a sign and trade. Now, they can add more players, they can add more teams, but all of that is proving the point that it becomes a lot more difficult to get a fair trade. And I guess the last thing that I would say on that is it further gets complicated because it means that the team accepting Deandre Ayton, for them to also have it be a legal trade, they have to send out about 24, 25 million to be able to accept back a player of 30 million like Deandre Ayton is on his max. So the math of it all between two teams without adding more players or other teams to help facilitate the trade is actually impossible. And that's why sign and trades are very rarely seen in the NBA.
And there are some ways, you feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on this. There are some ways around that specific aspect of it. And just to recap some of this, Ayton may be signing a $30 million first-year deal, but the Suns don't get $30 million of salary back. The most they can get in just a straight one-to-one sign-and-trade would be 19.1625 million. 19 million. We'll just call it 19 million. But
call it the Eric Gordon line.
Yeah.
I'm coining that now.
The team sending out salary has to send out a minimum of 24.32 million is basically where it comes out in order to have the space to sign the 30.5 million because of the rules around salary traded in and out. Unless they have a trade exception, I believe is one of the ways around that they can absorb him into, or if they have some cap space, but not all of the cap space in order to sign Deandre. And so if a team can make some cap space to absorb a little bit of extra money, but not enough that they need to send out the full amount of difference in that specific rule, then there is some level of possibility that it could be done. Is that right?
Yeah, and that's where you get into this thing of like, well, if they've got all the cap space, why don't they just try and sign Deandre Ayton outright? Or if they've got, or they can maneuver, enough cap space to make it happen, why don't they just spend all their time and energy doing that rather than coming up with a really difficult sign and trade with the Phoenix Suns? And that, again, is where you get into historically seeing some sign and trades where you look at the player going out and you kind of go, why did the other team even accept the value coming back? And that's purely because both teams see some value in executing a sign and trade for both of their kind of cap mechanisms going forward. But the trade itself isn't really fair value. It's just so the player doesn't walk entirely and you get nothing back for them.
A couple of recent historical examples. Well, I think the most recent historical example actually where a team received a really good player in a sign and trade was the Golden State Warriors with D'Angelo Russell. And the only reason they received a player as good as D'Angelo Russell was because the player they were giving out was Kevin Durant. But in other recent examples, you had Malcolm Brogdon when he went to the Pacers. They got, I think, the 16th pick. Christian Wood when he swapped from Detroit to Houston. I think Detroit got, it was like the 24th pick, if I'm not mistaken. So, you could argue DeAndre Ayton is better than both of those players, but you can obviously still see how it's depleted value.
Yeah.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, David. If you don't have an answer to this, I'm just kind of curious if you happen to. We understand now, I think, the rule of the base year compensation of why the money has to work. Do you know why this rule actually exists? Is the CBA putting it in there, or is the NBA putting it into the CBA specifically to dissuade teams from making tons of sign and trades all the time, or do you have any inkling of an idea how it started?
I always start sweating when someone says, I'm going to throw you a question without notice, particularly with the CBA. But this one, I do know the answer to. Well, most of the answer. The reason that base year compensation was created, and it really only exists now in its current form for sign and trades, it's got the same math as I said before with like a Landry Shamet, but that's completely different. That's a poison pill thing, which is completely different to base year compensation in sign and trades, is specifically so teams don't sign players to deals that they don't deserve purely for the purposes of trading them. So that this whole conversation is why the rule exists, because if the Suns didn't want DeAndre Ayton and don't feel that he's worth 30 million, they can't sign him to 30 million just to get 30 million of assets back from another team. They're restricted to receive half of that. And it's exactly for that reason. The only other thing that I would say on this before we potentially move on to other things with DeAndre Ayton is I'm glad you brought the D'Angelo Russell deal up, because I think it's a great example from a couple of points. There's a misconception out there, and it's one of the myths that seems to come up every single offseason for some reason, that you can't send other players out in a sign and trade. That is a myth. And the D'Angelo Russell deal is a perfect example of that, because other players went with D'Lo to the Warriors that I think eventually got waived. But that was, I guess, debunking that myth to make sure the listeners understand that. And that's important to what I mentioned before, to get around the math and the cap gymnastics of it all. The Suns and the other team are probably likely to have to include other players going both ways so they can get the math to work. And that's what happened in the D'Lo example, which, as you said, great example, a great player going one way and a good player going the other, which is probably the most that the Suns can hope for in this scenario, but it's going to have to include other players going both ways to make it all work.
Yeah, and another example of a signing trade is the Jimmy Butler, Josh Richardson one.
Oh, that's great. I should have remembered that.
Yeah, it's one we brought up on our last Patreon episode, but it's just an example of the difference between the two players that were traded for, right?
Yeah.
The Heat had no cap space, zero, and they had to make that trade in order to be able to sign who they did. And in fact, they also did one recently. Kyle Lowry, Goran Dragic was a trade that allowed Kyle Lowry to come to Miami. Miami's a good example of a team that has done this a few times before, actually, now just thinking about it. But yeah, the difference between Jimmy Butler and Josh Richardson is vast. It's vast. And like, if you want an example of something that could be possible, for example, if Indiana was still interested in DeAndre Ayton, they still wanted DeAndre Ayton, and they wanted to sign him to a max contract, theoretically, the Suns could come up with a deal centered around trading DeAndre Ayton for Miles Turner, who is an expiring contract, and the Indiana Pacers could potentially take on a full max contract for DeAndre Ayton. Would that be directly 1-1? No, there would probably be some other things that would have to happen in order for that to happen. But that is the type of contract that would fit, even though it's essentially half of what DeAndre Turner, he makes about $17 million.
He's okay. That's what I was going to ask you. I did not realize that Turner was that low with his salary of $17 million, because he's been a name who has actually been in the rumor mill for a long time.
Yep.
And specifically linked to the Suns. So that's kind of interesting.
And the Pacers almost traded for, or were at least in discussions for.
But it's like
DeAndre Ayton.
It still demonstrates the point that, like, obviously good player. I kind of like Miles Turner. Obviously depleted value. So it kind of feels like no matter what we do here, we explain all the rules of the sign and trade, but we come up with the same conclusion of this doesn't make a ton of sense for building a championship contender next season. It feels like there are better avenues to get the another great player next to Devin Booker and Chris Paul. And a sign and trade is just not it, in my opinion. You guys can feel free to debate that.
Well, David, I'll ask you, have you thought about any specific player as an example for people listening that would potentially work as a sign and trade?
I haven't, to be perfectly honest. But while you mention Indiana, I think that we all know and have seen from many sources that Sabonis was a guy that the Suns at least discussed last season around DeAndre Ayton. I think he's another great example of a player that plays the same position at a much less amount that hits your books, that the Suns were clearly interested in, purely not only for the reasons of this CBA stuff that we're going through, but potentially with money that they have elsewhere in other positions that they, I guess, are more comfortable spending around the $20 million mark on the center position rather than the $30 to $35 million mark that it might, cost you to keep Deandre Ayton around. So that's the only other name that, I kind of wait for real things to then start doing the math on whether they're actually possible, rather than I guess looking into too many hypotheticals and examples early on.
You know what's kind of ironic too, just real quick, wasn't one of the main points of drama with Indiana this year and for the past couple years, Miles Turner being one of those guys who thinks he deserves more touches than he gets.
They played two centers. They played two centers. It would be kind
of funny to replace Ayton with that. Just saying.
Yeah. Well, JaVale McGee said the Suns look for their centers more than any team he's ever played on. So I guess it depends on which center you're asking as far as the amount of touches that the centers get. I'm just going to throw another name out there to keep an eye on, Jakob Poeltl, not necessarily because I think the Suns are going to sign and trade DeAndre Ayton for Jakob Poeltl. But if the Spurs are interested in DeAndre Ayton and the Suns have the opportunity to match any contract, well, maybe they're moving on from Jakob Poeltl anyway, and the Suns could figure out a way to get Jakob Poeltl if they decide to let DeAndre Ayton go. It's a name I've mentioned to you guys in the past. In DMs.
I like that one, actually. I do. I mean, again, none of these are primary options for me. They're not what I'm looking at first. But of the names you've thrown out, yeah, I like Jakob Poeltl.
Just an example. I know people probably not super familiar with him. He's pretty good. He's a pretty good player. But it would still be a massive downgrade. We talk about the complications of signing trades and why the probably on paper the best option is just to match whatever contract DeAndre Ayton gets. You mentioned the starting salary, $30.5 million. And then there are, 5% raises every year for the length of his contract. The most another team could offer him is 4 years. So that would end it at $35 million in 25-26, correct, David?
Yeah, you've pretty much hit the nail on the head there. We mentioned earlier the Suns could still go 5 years. I believe the number is $177 million. The reason for that is they can add the extra year, and they can also do 8% raises, whereas other teams can only do 5%. And that's pretty key because Ayton's max from other teams is 4 years, $131 million, whereas the Suns could still offer the same 4 years, but with slightly higher raises, which, it's chump change at the end of the day when you're talking about this much money. But it means that the Suns, if they agree to terms with DeAndre Ayton on their own, could offer about $5.5 million more than any other team on a 4-year deal because they can do those 8% raises instead of 5% raises.
Now, you could argue, though, the only incentive that the Suns have to do that is to keep DeAndre Ayton happy, which is an important thing when you're trying to build a championship team, albeit.
Yeah.
But if the idea is, well, we can't get fair value in a sign and trade, so let's just match a contract offer that someone else gives him and then trade him in a year. The obvious downside there is that you're talking about massive implications regarding team chemistry. So I understand all of that, and that's a whole can of worms that we can open if you guys want. But there's not necessarily that incentive if you know you're going to trade the guy in 12 months to give him the extra 8% raise, as opposed to just matching a 4-year, $130 million contract that, say, one of these teams with cap space like Detroit or San Antonio or Indiana just offers him outright. You absolutely could do that.
Yeah, I think this is a good segue into probably the hottest that I'm going to get with a take, which isn't very hot at all when you see some of the other things that are flying around. This isn't going to restricted free agency. The Suns aren't matching an offer that officially comes from someone else. I mentioned it earlier. There's a lot of complications with restricted free agency. There's a lot of reasons why the Suns want to avoid restricted free agency, and there's a lot of good reasons why Ayton might want to also not go into restricted free agency, because it can leave you kind of hanging in the wind with not much leverage kind of 6 days into free agency in July. So what I'm saying is we're about to enter tampering season, guys. So
okay.
Basically, to navigate through the next few months and keep your sanity, like with all the rumors, all the grifting, everything else is is best to understand restricted free agency. And I know anyone listening to your guys' podcast wants to understand this stuff and kind of be better informed. So, as I said, my prediction is that it's not going to go to restricted free agency. The Suns will either sign him, or as we mentioned earlier, there'll be a super, super early sign and trade in free agency where everyone goes, hang on a minute, where the fuck did that come from? And why is this happening? So, as we've said many, many times, Ayton's max is 30.5 million. If a team signs Deandre to an offer sheet that the Suns have to match, they have to have $30.5 million in cap room. Right now, there's only 4 teams, Detroit, Indiana, Orlando, and the Spurs, that have that much cap room. A 5th is Portland, that have projectable cap room where they can make 1 or 2 very easy moves and free up that money. The problem is the Suns have 2 days to match that. And that 2 days doesn't kick in until after the July moratorium. So free agency starts July 1st. As we all know, you guys have had free agency reaction pods. I've done the same in the past. 1 minute past, or even before sometimes in free agency, deals start getting agreed to and announced via the various newsbreakers. The Suns don't have to match a Deandre Ayton offer sheet until July the 8th. So any team that officially signs him to an offer sheet, even if it's on July 1, which they are allowed to do these days, they have to wait that whole 6 days of the July moratorium, then the extra 2 days for the Suns to match, all to just find out that the Suns are going to match their offer sheet, and their $30 million in cap space is now basically not for shit, because every decent player that is worth signing to improve their team is now gone and has agreed to terms or officially signed on July 7 or July 8. So what does all this mean? As I said, basically tampering. Teams are going to try and leverage and make it seem like through their agent that they're going to sign Deandre to an offer sheet. The Suns are going to bluff and balk and say, well, we're just going to match anything. And then they're going to talk behind the scenes and they're going to work out whether there is a sign and trade that is possible where they can get it done. It can be done early on in July, and the Suns can then move on to what their plan Bs and Cs are after the players that they get back via. Or, as Sam alluded to, maybe they agree with Deandre Ayton and they give that extra $5 million, because there's plenty of reasons for the Suns to avoid restricted free agency as well. I think we mentioned it before. They can't trade Ayton for a whole year if he signs an offer sheet and the Suns match. They can't trade Ayton to the team that wanted him under any circumstance. So the whole year to other teams, Ayton could sign off on a trade and approve it. But if he says no, the Suns can't trade him. Even if he approves a trade to a Detroit that signed him to that offer sheet, they legally can't send him to Detroit for a whole year. So the one team that really wanted Deandre Ayton, if you match an offer sheet, you can't even trade him to that
That's
team
a good
if you
rule.
wanted to.
Yeah.
And offer sheets are typically designed for the Suns not to match. So it'll be low in years. It'll probably have several option years for Deandre Ayton. There might be advances on his salary that they have to pay early on in the season rather than the typical points that everyone else gets paid. And there's trade kickers that if you do end up trading him as well, it really impacts you and your team with percentage trade kickers too. So I know I've gone on for a long time here, so I'm sorry.
That's what it takes.
That's what it takes. And I wanted to outline all the reasons why I personally believe that we will hear very early on in July that Deandre Ayton and the Suns have agreed to terms, or that there's a sign and trade and everyone goes, hang on a minute, I thought we were supposed to kind of go through this process where the Suns have a chance to match and blah, blah, blah. It doesn't mean that they didn't go through that process, guys. Mm-hmm. They just didn't do it out in public in front of everybody else.
Yeah, and the reality of trades in the NBA is oftentimes they're kind of negotiated by the agents of the players who are like the outgoing players. So DeAndre Ayton's agent has probably already discussed the concept of a sign and trade for DeAndre in 2 other teams before the season has even ended. Like, this is just something that happens way ahead of time, regardless of what they want to convince you of.
And even if you do these kind of back alley deals, in 99% of cases, the NBA is not going to punish you for going behind the scenes this way, unless you're the Milwaukee Bucks with Bogdan Bogdanovic, in which case, fuck you, which is like the one time that I can remember them doing that, because that was also a sign and trade, right? That was obviously not a player the caliber of DeAndre Ayton, but was kind of a similar situation with what happened there. And yeah, they actually that was the one time that the NBA decided to enforce that rule.
God, what a disaster that would be for the Suns if all of a sudden they have a signing trade that gets
all that would
turned
happen
back by the NBA, and then they have to find a new option.
Like, what's the worst that could happen? They lose draft compensation. James Jones doesn't use draft compensation.
Well, they didn't get to keep the player.
Yeah. No,
they would have to find another suitor. In that case, but so we're coming back to the concept. I think we need to break down some of the numbers here, as far as why it may make the most sense for the Suns to just keep DeAndre, and even if that means the concept of trading him in the future. And that is basically related to the overall cap. But David, do you want to do something on that? Because I think you'll be the best at explaining this.
Yeah, I think if you look at DeAndre Ayton signing, a max or near max with the Suns, then with kind of 10 players on the books, the Suns are around 158 million, 158.7 to be precise. Woo. So that's, Booker, Paul, Bridges, Crowder, Shamet, Saric, Payne, Johnson, Torrey Craig, and DeAndre Ayton. So the tax level is 149 million. So with 10 players, we're already, quick math, 9.7 million over the cap, over the tax. Sorry. So then you're paying kind of tax money. Again, I can share this image that I'm looking at to help people kind of see this while I'm running through it verbally. So, they've got to then fill out a roster. Maybe they just go with minimum players, but every minimum player is going to come with kind of a, 1.5, 1.75 million surcharge, or percent surcharge, I should say, on every dollar that they spend above the tax. So that's really difficult. Take Ayton's 30 mil, say they let Ayton walk. Okay, you get down to 128.2 million. The cap's 122. So there's, even if they let Ayton walk, there's still 6 million over the cap. So they don't have other ways to replace DeAndre Ayton other than the non-tax mid-level and things like that, what they spent on Jay Crowder, for instance, and what they spent on JaVale McGee, even though they didn't spend the full MLE when they possibly could have. So yeah, we're back at almost like the sign and trade discussion, where if you let DeAndre Ayton walk, what you have at your disposal to actually replace DeAndre Ayton and the value you get back for him is significantly less than just keeping DeAndre Ayton, even if you're admittedly spending a bit more money on him for the next couple of years than you typically wanted to.
The only person you're doing a favor to there is Robert Sarver.
Yes.
Because obviously, I understand there's a difference in expectations for Robert Sarver between, look, we want you to go into the luxury tax and, we're going to be $5 million over the tax. But then there's a difference between what the Suns might be doing if they if they bring everyone back, which is, we're going to be $30 or $40 billion here once you include all the extra fees, which really is pretty, it's pretty significant, guys. I mean, like, if you look at the kind of tax bills that the Golden State Warriors have been paying over the past couple of years, it gets ludicrous at a certain point, to where, like, Golden State has obviously been able to justify it by being in this major market. And I'm never going to carry water for these billionaires. I want them to field the best team possible. But the higher that number gets, the more whining you might hear, for sure. And you are just illustrating a great point, David, that if they let DeAndre Ayton walk, it doesn't do us any favors. You'll have the mid-level to replace him, and that's not going to get you very far. Yeah. So,
and there's a way, by the way, just to clarify, that you could potentially find a way to shed yourself of Dario Saric's salary or Landry Shamet's salary and get slightly under the tax. But once you fill out the rest of the roster, you're probably going to be there anyway. Maybe the tax bill is not quite as high, and you lose the potential of two playable players that make the team better. But there is, I will say, looking at the cap sheet that you sent us, that Landry Shamet salary just pops off the page when looking at it, $9.5 million next season. Yeah, and there's just this looming Robert Sarver element floating above all of this.
Yeah, and I think that's a point worth making for any circumstance that goes forward, whether they keep Deandre Ayton, sign and trade Deandre Ayton, let Deandre Ayton walk. I think that we are going to be around the tax line no matter what. So looking at some of those contracts, which we might get to at the end in terms of, other trades that the Suns might look to make. I mentioned it before, kind of butchered it, but, the tax for, if you're up to $5 million over the tax, it's $1.50 surcharge for every dollar that you spend. But then between $5 and $10 million, it goes up to $1.75. And then from 10 to 15, it goes up to $2.50. And then from 15 to 20, it's $3.25 for every dollar that you spend. And then 20 million and up, it's $3.75. So when you're talking about any of these scenarios and Sarver's wallet, shedding salaries for players that aren't likely to play on a typical night, or maybe more typically in the playoffs, no matter what path they go down, we're going to see some shedding salary moves made.
And that's where you just have to reconcile the concept of, can you build a winner with a $30 million contract to Deandre Ayton? Ultimately, eventually, because you're gonna have to factor in the fact that, like you just described why Andrew Wiggins costs the Golden State Warriors like $70 to $80 million a year, basically, right? And that sounds insane. If you think about Andrew Wiggins on his own, but building a contender is another story. And for the Suns, there's just not a high possibility that Robert Sarver, if they do go into the tax, that it'll be a little bit, right? There's not a high possibility.
No, they're not doing Wiggins level.
Yes, there's just zero chance. So then you're talking about Devin Booker, Chris Paul, Mikal Bridges, and then DeAndre Ayton and maybe Cameron Johnson, right? And we'll talk about Cameron Johnson next, I think.
Well, if you guys are ready for it, I'd like to move off of DeAndre Ayton, because I think a really important point has been established, which we haven't said out loud yet, which is, if you fundamentally believe after this disastrous playoff run that the future of the Phoenix Suns is, we need to bring in another player who's on the level of Devin Booker, Chris Paul, can play alongside them. And like, that needs to be the future of this team, where you get a player like that as early as training camp, as early as the start of next season, who can be a high level scorer and assist this team in winning a championship. I think what we've established so far is to say that getting that player cannot be done through DeAndre Ayton, because your options with DeAndre Ayton were, as we've established, you let him walk. That's only helping Robert Sarver. You do the sign and trade, you're getting depleted value, or you re-sign him with the thought that, okay, maybe we trade him in a year or two, but you're not going to get that player immediately. So as we talk about our avenues going forward to improve, and obviously free agency, we know this is going to be an over the cap team. You're signing minimum level players, maybe a small exception. Yep. It's not going to be anyone significant in free agency, so don't even hope for that. So as we move forward now, what we've established is, if you want another player, great. The assets that you have to get there are, you have to look at every other guaranteed contract on this roster. And that's Mikal Bridges, obviously, is a huge one, $20 million. Jay Crowder at $10 million. Landry Shamet at $9.5 Yeah, not expiring. Which is important for
Jay. Yeah.
Jay Crowder, $10 million. Landry Shamet, $9.5. Dario Saric, 9.2. Campaign, 6, not technically expiring, but quasi expiring, because you could cut him and only a little bit after is guaranteed. These are the contracts that you need to talk about now. The only way to get that other great player, quote unquote great player, to come and assist Chris Paul and Devin Booker is by trading these other pieces that you have.
Yep. And I know you've covered it on Twitter in terms of, packaging some of those guys together to potentially get, and that are all expirings, to potentially get another great player. One thing I'm really high on from what this team has done when you look at that cap sheet that I sent you guys is the flexibility that they have financially, knowing that all of this was coming. Their head was not in the sand with all of this. They've done some really clever things to be able to give themselves options. They also have all of their own first round draft picks.
Exactly.
After
right.
20.
And they
after
refused to
2022.
give one up in this
Yes.
last trade deadline.
Yeah, I
Not
heard
coincidentally before this specific offseason.
I heard your point on the last pod with that and kind of nodded along as you were saying that. I think as much as I was annoyed, particularly the way we went out, that they didn't do an Eric Gordon type deal, I think that is why they didn't potentially do that. But
there's a chance for redemption for sure.
Yeah. All of this to say is they've been smart for what is going to be an over the cap team. And it's why I kept getting a lot of flack for defending the Landry Shamet deal as being smart business, because, frankly, he didn't do me a lot of favors in playing up to the contract. But this is what over the cap teams do. You sign players when you have the ability to, and then you tinker and make moves down the track instead of losing them for nothing. So, I guess everybody who's this far down with the podcast already will understand this is what I'm saying with Deandre Ayton, with Cam Johnson, if we get to that part of the conversation. This is a big reason why I advocate for doing this, signing guys and then changing things as you need to going forward. That's what smart teams do. They lock up their talent and then kind of make moves as they need to. So you guys laid it out. Crowder 10 million, Saric 9, Craig 5. That's 24.5 million. You do the plus 25% that you can accept back, you get to 30 million that you could take back in a player.
And you could give more than one draft pick at that point.
Exactly.
And with a 37-year-old Chris Paul, another team could talk themselves into that.
Yeah. As Sam said, you throw Payne in, who's a quasi expiring, and then you do the 25. Then you get up to basically any salary in the NBA can be taken back if you want to do that. So, going forward, they should have Mikal, Ayton, Cam Johnson, all on good deals as well. So then after this season, if you want to chase a second star, you've got all these guys between, 25, 26, 27 in age and also in salary that you can go and get a partner for Book to match along with his max extension, which is not something that we've even talked about, but that's going to be coming this offseason. So they have options, and that's why I advocate for keeping to extend those options with adding more assets to their books, because the only way that this goes bad, in my opinion, is if they try and make a short-sighted move with the assets that they have and it blows up in their face, and then they don't have things going forward. Right now, they've got, for a team typically in this position, they have a really good cap sheet, really good kind of treasure trove of assets, and kind of have all of these options at their disposal. Now they just have to do the hard bit of picking the right one and making sure it works. But, to be honest, they've got a pretty good track record at doing exactly that.
No, it's like, it's really textbook cap sheet versatility. It's like this cap sheet that you have. I'm looking at the one you sent to us. And again, what David will put this out publicly and we'll share it, but I'm looking at it here and it's just like, it's perfect. It's perfectly balanced between, you see Booker and Chris Paul at the top with their $34 and $28 million figures for next year, but then to have this many mid-level contracts and not just that, but I know no one wants to trade Mikal Bridges, but I'm just thinking about, like, if you were talking about what sort of attractive assets do you have who are signed to mid-level type deals that could then be used to go out and potentially fishhook some other team into giving you the type of asset who really moves walls in the NBA or in the NBA playoffs, like the type of asset out there I'm talking about a superstar scorer who makes $35 million a year. Maybe Jay Crowder, Landry Shamet, Dario Saric, while they are expiring money, isn't necessarily the sort of enticing piece that gets it done, but maybe Mikal Bridges is. Doesn't mean I want to trade him, but I'm just, putting that into people's minds. But yeah, versatility is really the name here. To have this many mid-level deals. James Jones, I would like to say this is my favorite part about the James Jones tenure as a GM with the Suns. And he deserves his flowers so far for putting in this much work to get to this point. And now he needs to execute something, obviously, to make it work.
And to just add to what you're saying there, Sam, that $20 million that Mikal Bridges is getting next year, Well, if you're trying to trade Deandre Ayton for a needle mover, any team is going to try to get Mikal Bridges as well. That's the only chance the Suns have to, and that would be trading Deandre Ayton and Mikal Bridges for a potential needle mover. Now you can debate how smart that would be all you want, but the reality of whatever these photoshops that people are putting online, it's going to take both of those guys to get them. And probably draft picks and probably more if you can get anything else out of
the Suns spent this much time becoming a team that's focused on depth, right? And that's great. It's gotten them as far as they've gotten. But it feels like if you wanted to embrace Photoshop season, grifting season, whatever you want to call it, you want to embrace tampering season and really get the type of third star that some people are envisioning out there. What that means is you've gotten all this depth up to this point, and eventually it's got to crumble a little bit. You have to embrace the other side of the spectrum, which is not having the versatile, balanced roster sheet, but embracing the big three life.
Pushing
Build
the chips
three.
Into
you
the
could
table,
do it
into the middle of the table. That's really what it is.
But you push the chips into the table of a big three of Chris Paul, Devin Booker, and someone.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the team, though, is
Jakob
going to
Poeltl. Just kidding.
No. But in order to achieve that, the rest of the roster sheet is going to be filled with minimum deals, for the most part, minimum deals and small deals here. Maybe you bring back a couple of these guys we haven't even talked about on their cap holds as well. But it's going to be like one of those traditional big three type rosters, not the type of depth at every position, 3 deep at every position type roster that James Jones has gloated about to this point.
On that note, Cam Johnson is eligible for a contract extension this summer, right? And we sort of, that's going to be this part of the conversation, unfortunately, for Cameron Johnson, because of how big of a question Deandre Ayton's future with the Suns is going to be throughout this offseason. But you talked about next year, Chris Paul, Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges, the guys who are under contract, plus $30.5 million for Deandre Ayton if the Suns offer him a 4-year max or they match whatever they end up doing. That gets them essentially to the tax once they fill out the roster already. And that's with Cameron Johnson on the books for $5.8 million. Cameron Johnson is going to get an extension, I think. I don't think it's likely because they're not flirting with the max deal right now with the way they were with Deandre Ayton. It's a lot closer to Mikal Bridges and what happened with Mikal Bridges. So I think he's going to get an extension. How do you think Deandre Ayton's potential max deal impacts Cameron Johnson's extension going forward? And can the Suns even do it?
Yeah, I am of the belief that the two are very separate from each other. And I think one reason why I wanted to come on and talk with you guys, one reason why I really appreciate that you guys delve into this is I think there's going to be a lot of discussion this offseason. The two things are very much linked, and a decision on one means, X for another or vice versa. And I don't really agree. Whilst when you look at the cap sheet and, with both of them on the books, it means, essentially being over the tax with only 7 players on the books next year. I've been saying all episode, you've got choices down the road to then make, and you don't make a decision early for a decision that is going to have to be made later. You kind of kick the can down the road and wait. So like Mikal, if they do the extension this year, it has nothing to do with the salary cap sheet in 22-23, but it kicks in the following year like Mikal. And I agree with you, Mike. I think that a deal will get done, and I think it'll be very similar to Mikal's, maybe a little bit less money. I mean, I'm interested in your thoughts, what you think a deal might be for Cam Johnson. I've put it in this sheet at 80 mil over 4 years and just flat 20 mil a year. I think that might even still be on the high side. But what I wanted to illustrate was that I think like Mikal, the Suns will have a figure in mind and they won't be budging on that. It'll be, this is the offer. You get security now if you accept, or you can go to restricted free agency, and just like Deandre Ayton, then you have to go and get an offer from someone else before we match it. But if we still want to keep you, we can. So we're not going to overextend ourselves with an offer at 12 months before we actually have to. So it's going to be identical to Mikal in that sense. And I think his team, if they're doing their job right, will take the security of a good offer from the Suns versus risking him having a injury or bad season in 22,
Right.
23, and not having that security going into restricted free agency.
Do you guys think his playoffs play impacted what he was going to make in this offseason at all?
Well, you know what? It's funny because I was actually looking at his playoff stats recently, and he played better than I think I realized. Like, that's the thing about Cam Johnson is he never has these takeover 25, well, except for the next game this year. But otherwise, he never has these takeover 25-point performances with the brightest lights. And you could argue, he's never been given the opportunity because Jay Crowder's held that starting spot all year, and I would agree with that. But just, I do think it hurts his contract value in these discussions where it's like you look at his playoff numbers and you realize, oh, Cam Johnson averaged 11, 3, and 1.5 in an off-the-bench role on good shooting splits across the board all playoffs, but didn't take over a single game. And
but
so
worse
my initial
shooting splits than the regular season, I think, is where he's kind of hurt,
but
right?
I mean, 47, 37, 81.
Yeah.
It's fine. I guess for me, it's just like I do look at that number that you put in, David, and 20 million, I'll be honest, does feel a little bit high to me. I would still pay it. And I don't think you're gonna get a heavy discount. Maybe you get 17 or 18. I don't think we're talking about like
it's
13.
His entire prime, I think, is worth adding
Right.
into
That's a good
the
point.
context. It's his one good contract and his probably best value contract from an output standpoint. I think it's a little bit on the high side too. I'm not going to lie, but I think that, and again, my one prediction for this offseason that I'm comfortable saying right now is I think that Cam Johnson gets an extension around this. I think people like, I don't have insight to the Suns, but I do kind of read tea leaves, and Kevin Arnovitz keeps talking every opportunity he gets about how much the Suns love Cam Johnson and how proud of that pick they are. So I think
that's just really funny to me.
They got to bring it up, man, to distract from the other one.
Yeah, it's coming from somewhere. So I think he's staying, and I think if it is around that $80 million, the one prediction that I'm willing to make is that I think Crowder is getting traded, and it might be with Saric for a bigger piece, or it might just be to shed his salary and do some of those tax gymnastics that we talked about earlier. And I think before Cam Johnson goes into the extension, he's going to be the starting power forward for the Suns next year.
Okay, I definitely want to address that because that's really important. The only other thing I want to say first, though, about Cam is just to not give people the wrong idea, because when you started this conversation, Mike, you said this would be like the "and what else" piece of the discussion. You're definitely right. There's an element of that that's fair, though, because the Deandre Ayton thing we're hoping is going to be neatly wrapped up by July, like David said. Whereas if Cam Johnson, and I agree with you guys, I think Cam Johnson's going to get extended by the Phoenix Suns this summer, but it's not even going to be this summer. It's going to be September or October, like it was with Mikal Bridges the day
Only
before
the
that
Suns.
extension deadline.
Only the Suns can offer him money right now.
Correct.
Right? So it doesn't have to be right away.
So if it kind of feels like a question that falls by the wayside all summer, and then at one point we're doing a late podcast in early October, being like, oh yeah, by the way, the deadline's next week. Are they going to re-sign Cam Johnson? I think they're going to get a deal done, but it feels to me like that's going to be what happens again.
Well, just to remind people about how it worked, Booker signed his extension the day they were allowed to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Deandre Ayton and Mikal Bridges went long, and I think I've never gotten confirmation on this. I think the reason Mikal Bridges his was announced so late is because they wanted to announce them together. I think they probably came to that conclusion on that deal a lot sooner than they announced it.
David, because I wanted to turn back to the other thing you said, because it was really interesting. Your prediction of Jay Crowder will not be on the Suns next year. It's interesting to me because it's like, again, what are their options, right? So Chris Paul's coming back. Devin Booker's coming back. Deandre Ayton's coming back, at least initially. We've kind of settled on all that. So their options are, how do you improve the team? You have to improve at a wing spot, essentially.
Yep.
Unless, because you could do the route, I guess, of like, let's swap $10 million role players that we have for other $10 million role players to bring off the bench. Like, let's get a campaign replacement. Let's get, a Landry Shamet replacement, whatever. They could do that. I don't think it significantly improves the ceiling of this team. I think it just feels like throwing a bunch of shit at the wall. So their real avenue for improving is upgrade a forward spot. And then it does bring up a really interesting question of, are you going to go all for it at the power forward spot and try and get a real upgrade for Jay Crowder? You put together Jay Crowder, Dario Saric, maybe Torrey Craig or Campaign or someone else, and go for like a real $25 million power forward who's out there. And to what extent does that kind of continue to disenfranchise a Cam Johnson who will continue to have to come off the bench? Or are you replacing Mikal Bridges essentially? But it feels like the upgrade has to come at one of those two spots, doesn't it?
Yep. And I don't think that you pay Cam, I guess as little as 15 per year and as much as maybe 20 per year to come off the bench longer term during that extension. Right. And that's, so this prediction is not only me reading the tea leaves on the off court stuff with, the contract and where the Suns are salary cap wise and not being able to, really afford a guy being paid that much to come off the bench, but it's also the on-court, which you've mentioned, Sam, how they ended this year, how they're going to look going forward, how do they bring a different look next year? And as great as Jay was during the playoffs in both rounds, to be perfectly honest, to some degree, I just look at the way that the Pelicans and the Mavs game planned for the Suns defensively. And I think one of their big kind of parts of their game plan was, we're just going to leave Jay Crowder. Now, in the Mavs series in particular, he did a great job of not only shooting from deep, but when he was chased off the line, getting in, hitting that floater, getting to the rim. But what it tells me is that those two teams were fine with that. They didn't think they were going to get beat by Jay Crowder. And I agree with them. I think they did the right game plan. I think you need Cam, if you're going to go all in again on Booker and Chris Paul and Deandre Ayton, I think you need one of the most dangerous shooters in the NBA out on the perimeter that teams won't be as willing to leave, and a little bit more athleticism. He's not the most athletic guy in the world, but he certainly can get to the rim better than Jay Crowder. So I think it is a small tinker to that starting lineup that not only makes sense from a math perspective, but it makes sense from an on-court perspective as well.
Just a note on Cameron Johnson too. Regardless of what happens in the extension conversation, he's still on the books for just $5.8 million next year. Correct. It's another reason why, whatever the final outcome of the Deandre Ayton situation is, whether that be a sign and trade this offseason, signing for a max contract, signing for less than a max contract is still on the table if it goes to restricted free agency, or whatever it ends up being, the Suns still have the opportunity to sign him to an extension that doesn't kick in until next year. And if they have a situation where they don't believe in the team as it's currently constructed, they can make moves before that extension kicks in, or potentially even trade him when that extension kicks in for a player if they want to end up trading Cameron Johnson. So they have opportunities within that doesn't necessarily put the kind of finality on the pressure that they're under for this specific upcoming season. They have flexibility within that.
Yep, nailed it.
If you'll permit me to do this, guys, I'm sorry, but I'm looking up basically forwards in the NBA signed through contracts at least through next season in like the $20 to $30 million contract
Jeremy
range.
Grant, I think.
Jeremy Grant is there.
That's
Jeremy Grant makes $20 million and is an expiring contract last year. Kyle Kuzma, I guess.
He's a good rebounder, right?
Jeremy Grant is definitely there where it's just like, that would be so easy. It's just here, take Jay Crowder, Dario Saric. It's all expiring money in a first round pick. Give us Jeremy Grant. That would be a really easy upgrade. You could totally do that. But yeah, it's just some of the names here are hilarious. You guys want Julius Randle? He's right in that range.
I mean, I don't know.
He's definitely available.
I might.
No, it was a joke.
What happens with DeAndre Ayton? I think that will depend on that, right? That's kind of interesting. Yeah, I think we're going to have a lot of opportunities to talk through this a little more before this turns into a 2-hour podcast. I'll ask David, is there anything that you want to talk about or that you wish we would have asked you about that you want to get in before we end this episode? Any predictions or anything about the cap sheet that stands out that we didn't cover?
No, I think I got out everything that was kind of highlighted that I really wanted to get out. And yeah, I'm mindful of the fact that, as I always manage to do, we've gone pretty long here. So I'm happy to get out if it means coming back when something is actually on the table during the off season to join you guys and kind of break down all the math of it. I'm going to be scratching around for opportunities now that I'm kind of taking a back seat. So more than happy to do that. The only other thing I will mention is I will share this image, and the only thing on it that we didn't specifically touch on is Devin Booker's max extension. The moment he is given his deserved All-NBA spot for this season, that means the Suns can offer him a extension that kicks in for the 24-25 season. And I've put those numbers in the cap sheet just for people to see the impact that it has on the overall books going forward. It will start at $47.1 million in 24-25, where Booker will be eligible to earn 35% of the salary cap. But there will be some new TV money. So the Suns locking that in before that new TV money hits is actually good business again. So I expect, like you mentioned, Mike, when he got his last extension, it was on day one of the offseason. Maybe it won't be day one, who knows? But I'd expect that to be one of the first orders of business this offseason that people, I guess, aren't talking about as much because, it's quite a few years away before it actually has.
Maybe one of these years, the cap, because of new TV money, the cap will jump like $30 million again without the league smoothing it, because that was very stupid when they didn't smooth it. And the Suns will have cap space to sign a Kevin Durant like the Warriors did exactly because of that situation in 2015 or 2016.
Once he's washed, we'll be able to we'll be able to sign him. So I guess for people listening, we broke down the Deandre Ayton situation from as many angles as we could in this specific podcast. The thing that makes the most sense on paper, once again, is to sign him and figure out what to do later. Get him on the books first. It's up to you, I think, people who are listening, to sort of find a way to figure out how you feel about that based on how this last season ended, because it does make the most sense. Now you understand the mechanisms that go into a sign and trade. If you find one that makes sense, feel free to throw it at us and let us know, I think, your levels of confidence in just signing that max and figuring it out later. Because look, for all the smoke screens and agent reports that are going to come out, I'm not sure how much Deandre Ayton still wants to be here. I think we're going to get a pretty good idea of what he wants us to think over the next few weeks. But Sam, go ahead. You had a point?
No, I was just going to say, I think the only angle we didn't cover was bringing Deandre Ayton back has the potential to turn this team into a team that, at least on its face, is still going to be trying to contend for a championship next season. To what extent does that turn the locker room into a circus if he really doesn't want to be here and he knows that you don't want him there? That's a speculative conversation that we can continue to have in the offseason, but I understand why we couldn't cover kind of that portion of it today. But I think people are thinking about it in the backs of their minds too.
If you don't already, I don't know how much you're going to get from David on his Twitter, but if you don't follow him already, make sure to follow him at the 4 Point Play on Twitter, Roman numerals 4 Point Play. Is there anything, now you have no newsletter, David, is there anything else that you want to tell people about?
No, there isn't, to be honest. I don't need to go into plug season. Feel free to follow me. Always willing to talk about this stuff, but I'm not going to be outwardly pushing content like I was previously. So totally understand if people also stop, following and maybe even start dropping off the following on Twitter. But I think I said it before I announced that the newsletter was ending. I'm kind of, a lot of people gave me a lot of their time to help me learn this stuff. And examples actually and case studies were the best way that I learned a lot of this stuff digging into it. So all I would say is that if you have a genuine interest in this and you don't just listen to content like this to have all the answers and you actually want to learn how to work out the answers, please reach out to me, because I'm kind of at a point where I need to pay forward a lot of the time and energy that people gave me. And I love talking about this stuff. So as much as I'm not going to be doing it out in the open through the newsletter and other things, if I can teach some other people to maybe take that on and push the info out to everyone like we have here with you guys, that's all I'll plug is feel free to throw me examples and math and case studies of what you're working out, and we can work those things out together. And I think people that do that will be much more educated in being able to explain it to other people, to be honest.
Well, we appreciate you, David, and we'll definitely be dragging you back onto this podcast, even without the newsletter, whether it be in the off season or the upcoming season. So we definitely thank you for coming on. If you're interested in extra content from us, make sure to check out our Patreon. It's patreon.com/thetimeline. We have the second half of our massive mailbag from our patrons that will be coming sometime midweek this week. And then, of course, we'll be back next week with a regular episode. We appreciate you guys, and we'll be back soon.
For over a century, Johnny Walker has shared its bold spirit with the game of golf. Now, crafted with Devereaux Golf, Johnny Walker introduces the Johnny Walker Blue Label-inspired Sunday Golf Bag, elevating the game with sleek design, Blue Label hues, and refined gold accents. Celebrate your hole-in-one with a premium Sunday bag crafted by Devereaux Golf. Submit proof of your achievement to johnnywalker.com/blue-in-1. Please drink responsibly.